You know that feeling? You've spent hours, maybe years studying English. You've got the grammar rules down, thousands of vocabulary words. You might even understand phonetics. But then you step into a real conversation or try to follow a movie without subtitles, and it feels like none of that knowledge is actually working.
Right.
Like you have all the pieces, but you just can't use them when it really matters.
Yeah, that disconnect is incredibly frustrating, and it's probably one of the most common barriers learners face. It's hitting that wall between knowing about English and actually being able to, well, operate it effectively in real-time communication.
Operate it.
It's the difference, really, between having say, a recipe book full of perfect instructions and actually being able to cook the dish successfully in a busy kitchen.
Okay, yeah, that cooking analogy immediately clicks for me. It's not just about having the ingredients, it's about being a skilled chef. And that's exactly what this deep dive is all about today. We've got a fantastic source that really takes this common problem head on. It moves us beyond just accumulating English knowledge and dives deep into the mechanics of operating that knowledge in the real world.
Yeah, this text provides a really insightful framework. It analyzes how we use English, breaks down the core abilities you need for that operation, and then, crucially, offers concrete strategies to improve those abilities.
So our mission today is to unpack this whole process, understand what operating English truly means, figure out what those essential abilities are, learn how to train them effectively, and ultimately derive a powerful, actionable strategy for, transforming your English. Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
So the source starts right there, doesn't it?
Sure.
Defining this core concept, operating English. It's not just about possessing knowledge, right?
Correct. The definition is quite precise, actually. It's about using the three fundamental types of English knowledge, that's vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation appropriately, to achieve two main goals. First, to understand English when you hear or read it, that's your input. And second, to express yourself when you speak or write, that's output. So it's the active application of your stored knowledge.
I love how the source immediately brings in that cooking analogy again. It just makes the distinction between knowledge and operation so clear.
It's perfect, isn't it? Because everyone intuitively understands it. Imagine your English vocabulary, grammar rules, pronunciation sounds. Those are your ingredients.
Right.
You might have every single ingredient listed in a complex recipe. You know what time is, you know what sautéing means, in theory. But having the ingredients doesn't mean you can execute the recipe, especially, under pressure.
You could have a pantry overflowing with exotic spices and gourmet produce. But if you've never actually chopped an onion quickly or timed searing a steak, you're going to struggle to put a decent meal on the table.
Exactly right. Operating English is the act of cooking with those ingredients. It's taking that vocabulary, knowing which word fits the context. It's taking that grammar rule, instinctively applying the correct tense or structure. It's taking that pronunciation knowledge, forming the sounds and intonation to actually be understood. It's using your knowledge dynamically to produce or comprehend meaningful communication.
So the source really emphasizes that the real goal of learning isn't just having the biggest pantry of English ingredients. It's about becoming a skilled English chef, capable of creating delicious meals, or in our case, meaningful interactions and understanding.
Precisely. It's gaining the ability to wield your knowledge as a functional communication tool. That's what gives the knowledge its actual value. Knowledge is potential energy. Operation is kinetic energy.
That reframes everything, doesn't it? Instead of just like studying more lists, it's about practicing the use of what you already know and maybe identifying what's missing in that operational process.
Exactly.
So if we want to improve our cooking skills, our operational skills, we first need to understand how cooking actually works in different scenarios. And the source does this by analyzing the operation process within each of the four main English skills.
Right. The text systematically breaks down reading, listening, writing, and speaking to show how the three knowledge types, vocab, grammar, and pronunciation, are utilized in each one. It's quite methodical.
Okay, let's start with reading then. That's an input skill, where the goal is simply to understand written text.
Yes. And according to the source's analysis, reading primarily requires your vocabulary and grammar knowledge. Critically, pronunciation knowledge isn't directly necessary here because you're working with visual symbols, letters, not sounds.
Okay, so you need to know the words, that's vocab, and how they fit together, that's grammar. What's the actual process like when we're reading?
Well, the core process involves moving sequentially through the written text, typically, left to right in English. As you scan the words, You're simultaneously engaging your vocabulary knowledge to grasp the meaning of individual words and your grammar knowledge to understand the structural relationships between those words.
Yeah.
You're constantly interpreting how the words are arranged to form phrases, clauses, sentences, synthesizing these interpretations to build up an understanding of the overall message.
So if I see a sentence like, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, I'm not just recognizing the quick brown individually. I'm using grammar to see, okay, the quick brown fox is the subject phrase, jumps is the verb, over the lazy dog is a prepositional phrase telling me where.
Exactly that. You're applying both layers of knowledge, vocab, and grammar concurrently. And the source highlights something interesting here. This process, which might initially feel very conscious and analytical, like you're deliberately identifying subjects and verbs, right?
Yeah, definitely feels like that sometimes.
It becomes increasingly unconscious and automatic with sufficient practice. Eventually, you just read, and the meaning registers, much like it does in your native language. That's the mark of really efficient operation in reading.
That makes sense. It shifts from conscious decoding to more direct comprehension. Okay, now, listening, also an input skill, also focused on meaning comprehension, but there's a significant difference here.
And this is a crucial distinction the source makes. While both reading and listening aim for meaning, listening starts with sound. You don't see the words, you hear them.
Right.
This means the very first step requires pronunciation knowledge to instantaneously recognize which words are being spoken based on the acoustic signals hitting your ear.
So your brain is getting this stream of sounds, and it has to match those sounds to known words from your vocabulary inventory using your understanding of how those words should sound.
Precisely. And this initial sound-to-word mapping relies heavily on your pronunciation knowledge, not just how individual words are supposed to sound in isolation, like in a dictionary, but also how sounds change, link, reduce, or even disappear in natural, rapid speech. That's key.
Okay.
Once you've successfully identified the words from the sound stream, the subsequent steps for meaning comprehension are, interestingly, the same as in reading. You apply your vocabulary and grammar knowledge to interpret the meaning of the words now that you know what they are.
So the unique bottleneck then, the specific challenge that often makes listening harder than reading for a lot of people, is that initial step,
Yeah.
accurately recognizing spoken words from their sound in real time.
That's the key insight from the source's analysis of listening.
Yeah.
It argues that if you can effectively master that hearing part, the ability to accurately identify the stream of spoken words based on their sound, even with all the messy bits of natural speech, then the rest of the process, using vocab and grammar to understand the meaning, becomes much more manageable. It aligns much more closely with your reading ability. It's really about isolating that unique auditory decoding challenge.
That's fascinating. It really explains why just knowing lots of words and grammar rules isn't enough for listening comprehension. If you can't actually hear the words being spoken in the first place, the rest of your knowledge is kind of useless for that task.
Exactly. It adds that critical third dimension of pronunciation knowledge to the input process, specifically for the auditory skill. It's non-negotiable for listening.
Okay, let's switch gears to the output skills. Writing first. This is where we take a thought or a feeling and convert it into English text.
Right. Writing is an output skill, and it begins, as the source puts it, with your internal feeling or sense, or maybe a specific idea you want to communicate. According to the source, it primarily requires vocabulary and grammar knowledge. Like reading, pronunciation isn't directly involved in the physical act of putting words on paper or screen.
So you have this internal impulse, this message, and you need to reach into your vocabulary and grammar knowledge base to actually construct it.
Yes. The process involves actively selecting and combining appropriate vocabulary words and grammar structures from your knowledge pool. You're building the English output piece by piece based on your mental blueprint of what you want to say.
And the source points at a pretty significant advantage writing has over speaking, doesn't it?
Time. Definitely time. Writing typically offers you much more time for planning, for word selection, for sentence construction, revision, compared to the demands of a real-time conversation.
Right, you can agonize over the perfect word.
Exactly. This allows for more deliberate choices and often results in more precise, carefully constructed sentences than you might produce spontaneously when speaking.
Makes sense. You can draft, edit, rephrase until you feel you've got it right. Okay, finally then speaking. Also an output skill. Also starting from your internal thought or feeling.
Yes. But speaking requires all three knowledge types: vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. The critical difference from writing is the need to convert the constructed sentence into sound using your vocal apparatus, your voice, mouth, tongue, which absolutely requires pronunciation knowledge.
And this conversion to sound isn't leisurely like writing. It has to happen pretty much instantly in a conversation.
Absolutely. That need for instantaneous decision-making and execution is really what makes speaking significantly more challenging than writing for most learners. You have to simultaneously choose the right words, apply the correct grammar, convert that structure into understandable sound using your pronunciation, and do it all while engaging with another person, often under social pressure and time constraints. There's a lot going on.
So it's the speed, the real-time performance pressure, and the addition of that crucial pronunciation element that really elevates speaking's difficulty compared to writing, even though the initial sentence construction process might be similar in theory.
Precisely. And this instantaneous nature often leads to a different style compared to formal writing, too. Speaking is frequently less planned, more spontaneous. It involves more on-the-spot construction, maybe rephrasing, perhaps using simpler structures just to maintain fluency rather than aiming for perfect grammatical complexity all the time. It's about getting the message across effectively right now.
Wow, okay, breaking down each skill like that really highlights the specific demands and the role of each knowledge type, vocab, grammar, pronunciation. It also makes it crystal clear why some skills feel harder than others. And the source argues that this detailed analysis of how we operate English in each skill allows us to simplify the task of improving. This feels like we're getting into the core of Chapter 3 now.
Yes, this is where the complexity really gets distilled down. By looking at what's required across all 4 skills, the source concludes that the ability to operate English can be effectively broken down into just 4 core abilities that we actually need to train.
Just 4! After all that analysis,
Yeah.
that sounds surprisingly manageable.
That's the power of this framework, I think. Based on the analysis we just walked through, the 4 essential abilities for operating English are: number 1, meaning comprehension ability. This is required for understanding input, so reading and listening.
Okay, understanding meaning. Got it.
Number 2, sentence construction ability. This is required for creating output, so writing and speaking.
Building sentences. Makes sense.
Number 3, hearing ability.
Yeah.
This is specifically required for that sound-to-word decoding step in listening.
Just the hearing part, okay.
And number 4, pronunciation ability. This is specifically required for converting constructed sentences into understandable sound in speaking.
Okay, so meaning comprehension and sentence construction cover the core cognitive processes of understanding and creating language.
Exactly, the kind of brain work.
And hearing and pronunciation are the specific abilities related to handling the sound dimension, which is unique to listening and speaking.
You got it. That's the breakdown.
This simplification is really powerful. It shifts the focus from this vague goal like, I need to improve my English, for really concrete targets like, okay, I need to improve my ability to understand meaning quickly, or I need to get better at building sentences on the fly, or I need to improve my ability to distinguish sounds, or I need to work on making clearer sounds.
Exactly. It clarifies precisely what you need to train, cutting through that feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer vastness of the English language. It gives you a focused target for your practice. It's much more actionable.
This feels like page 22, chapter 3, right here.
Yeah.
This is where the source really dives into how to improve these specific abilities based on this analysis. This is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Absolutely. Understanding the 4 abilities is the crucial first step. Now, based on the analysis of how each skill is operated, the source presents specific, actionable methods for training each one. This is the practical application part.
Let's start then with improving meaning comprehension. This is key for both reading and listening, you said.
Right. The source first reiterates the prerequisite. You absolutely need a solid foundation of vocabulary and grammar knowledge.
Okay, the ingredients again.
The ingredients. And while vocabulary acquisition is, pretty much a continuous lifelong journey,
Yeah.
grammar, being a more finite set of rules and patterns, can and probably should largely be mastered in a focused, relatively short-term period. The source even gives an estimate suggesting that around 180 to 300 hours of focused grammar study is often sufficient to build that foundational knowledge base.
Okay, so nail down the grammar structure first. That's achievable.
It's a manageable goal. With that knowledge base in place, the core practice for boosting meaning comprehension ability is intensive practice, intensive reading, and intensive listening.
Intensive. So this isn't just like skimming an article or passively listening to a podcast while doing chores.
Absolutely not. Definitely not passive. The source details a specific analytical four-step process for this intensive practice. Step 1. Actively identify the specific parts of the written text or the audio that you do not understand. This requires honesty, and patients don't just gloss over the bits that feel fuzzy.
Step 1. Pinpoint the exact point of confusion. Don't ignore it.
Exactly. Step 2. Analyze the cause of that lack of understanding. Why didn't it make sense? Was it a vocabulary word you didn't know? Was it a grammar structure you didn't recognize or maybe misunderstood? Or was it a combination of both? This diagnostic step is critical. You have to figure out the root cause.
Step 2. Figure out why. Is it a vocab ingredient missing or a grammar cooking technique? I don't know. Like the analogy?
Precisely. Step 3. Learn the missing knowledge. If it's vocabulary, look up the word's meaning, its usage, common collocations, how it's typically used with other words. If it's grammar, review or learn the specific rule, pattern, or structure that confused you. Use your grammar resources.
Step 3. Actively acquire the specific missing piece, the ingredient or the technique.
And step 4. This is important. Re-engage with the original text or audio. Go back to it, actively applying the new knowledge you just acquired to understand the previously confusing part fully. Confirm that it now makes sense in context. Don't just learn it and move on. Verify the understanding.
Step 4. Reread or re-listen with the new knowledge and make sure it actually works now. Make sure you get it. It's a deliberate problem-solving cycle.
It absolutely is. And the source strongly emphasizes the importance of this analytical problem-solving approach. Simply reading or listening extensively without understanding why you're getting stuck is inefficient. You're likely just reinforcing your areas of confusion or developing bad guessing habits. This intensive diagnostic process is how you build the actual muscle for effective comprehension. You're actively training your ability to parse and understand step by step.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's about quality over quantity, at least initially, to build the underlying skill. What about HUC? Extensive reading and extensive listening, though. We hear those terms thrown around a lot, and they definitely seem to imply quantity, just consuming lots of material.
Yeah, and the source presents a very interesting perspective here that actually integrates intensive and extensive practice. It argues that Hakka and Ha are not fundamentally separate activities, but rather the natural progression that happens when you increase the volume of Qian and Hak.
Wait, how can intensive practice, which sounds slow and detailed, lead to extensive practice, which sounds fast and broad?
Well, think about it. As your meaning comprehension ability improves through consistent intensive analysis by becoming faster and more accurate at identifying problems, analyzing causes, and acquiring the necessary knowledge, the time you spend on those first 3 steps of the 4-step process decreases for each piece of text or audio you encounter.
Ah, okay.
You encounter fewer unknown words or confusing structures overall. And when you do hit one, you resolve it much more quickly because you've practiced that analytical process.
Oh, I see. So because you're getting more efficient at the intensive troubleshooting for each little challenge, you can naturally cover more material in the same amount of study time. It just naturally becomes extensive.
Exactly. The intensive practice builds the efficiency and the skill that makes high-volume, extensive reading and listening truly effective for reinforcing and expanding your knowledge and fluency. The source basically cautions against trying to jump straight into massive amounts of extensive input without building this analytical skill first. The benefit will be limited if you're constantly lost or only grasping the superficial meaning.
It's like building the engine properly before you try to drive cross-country just by flooring it.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. The source also includes a helpful side note here, actually. It uses an example from, I think it was a Kyoto University entrance exam question, to point out that sometimes a lack of understanding isn't purely an English ability issue. The content itself might be inherently complex, requiring critical thinking or background knowledge that could challenge even native speakers.
Right.
So it's important to distinguish between an English comprehension problem, which you train with Guos, and just general difficulty understanding complex ideas, which is a different kind of challenge.
That's a really valuable distinction to make. It stops you from thinking every single struggle is some kind of language deficit on your part. Sometimes the topic is just hard.
Precisely.
Okay, next ability then. Sentence construction. This is about building English output for writing and speaking.
Right. And again, the prerequisites are having that vocabulary and grammar knowledge in your toolkit. You need those building blocks to construct anything meaningful.
Makes sense. You can't build a house without bricks and mortar. So what's the practice method the source recommends for this?
It involves a core practice consisting of two repeated steps. The first step is to take your internal feeling or sense, the specific idea or message you want to convey, and simply try to express it in English using the vocabulary and grammar that you already know.
Just get the thought out there, even if it feels awkward or, clunky at first.
Yes, the source explicitly encourages this. It's okay to take your time initially. You can even write it down if that helps organize your thoughts. If you immediately realize you're missing a crucial piece of knowledge, like you need a specific word you don't know, or you're unsure of a grammatical construction, it's okay to do a quick check, maybe an online search, to supplement. But the primary goal in this first step isn't achieving perfect accuracy right away. It's broadly expressing the feeling or idea using your current resources.
Like the example in the source. Maybe you want to express, I'm so tired today, I need to go to bed early tonight. You access your knowledge and put together words, like tired, go to bed, and basic structures like I'm plus adjective and I need to plus verb. You're using the tools available to you, even if a native speaker might phrase it slightly differently.
Exactly. You're translating your internal thought into an actual English sentence, however imperfect it might be initially. And the source makes a crucial point here. This act of producing English, even imperfectly, creates opportunities for realizations or noticings later on.
Realizations, what does that mean in this context?
Yes. By attempting to express your thought, you become sensitized to how that same thought or similar ideas are expressed by native speakers. When you then encounter native English later through reading, listening, watching movies, whatever, and you see or hear someone expressing a similar idea, you might have a moment of recognition. Oh, they used this specific word, or, oh, they phrased it like this. These moments of noticing the gap between your own production and native usage are incredibly valuable for refining your output over time.
I see.
If you never attempt to construct the sentences yourself, you miss these chances for realization. You don't have that internal hypothesis to compare against.
That's powerful. You're essentially creating a hypothesis with your own output, maybe a rough draft, and then you're testing and refining it against real-world native input later on. What's the second step in this practice?
Okay, so once you have a constructed sentence, your attempt at expressing the feeling, the second step is to strongly image the feeling or sense behind it. Really picture the situation where you would actually use that sentence. Then repeatedly say the sentence aloud with that feeling, immersing yourself in the imagined context of using it.
So it's not just saying the words like a robot reading a script. It's actively linking the words, the grammar, the sound, and the feeling or intention behind it all.
Precisely. The purpose here is to forge a strong, direct link between the internal intention, the feeling sense, and the external English expression, the specific words and structure you've chosen. This repeated practice, combined with the strong mental image and the feeling, speeds up that connection. You're training your brain and mouth to retrieve and produce the correct English pattern directly from the feeling, which eventually leads to what the source calls unconsciousization.
Unconsciousization, meaning you can eventually generate these sentences spontaneously without having to consciously think through each word or grammar rule every single time.
Exactly. You build direct pathways from thought to English expression. You're practicing the act of production repeatedly, making it faster, smoother, and eventually automatic, or at least semi-automatic. This is fundamentally how fluent output develops.
That two-step process feels incredibly practical. First, figure out how to express the thought with your current tools, even if it's rough. Second, solidify that expression and link it strongly to the underlying feeling so it becomes more automatic over time.
It's building both the conscious understanding of how to say something and the automatic reflexes needed for fluent production. It addresses both aspects.
Okay, so that covers meaning comprehension and sentence construction. Now, the abilities specifically related to sound, hearing, and pronunciation. The source emphasizes a really crucial link between these two, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this link is foundational to how the source recommends training them. The core principle stated is basically, what you can pronounce, you can hear, but what you can hear, you cannot necessarily pronounce.
That's an interesting asymmetry. So if I can make a sound correctly, I can probably identify it when someone else makes it. My ear knows what to listen for because my mouth knows how to make it.
Right.
But just because I can recognize a sound when I hear it doesn't mean I can physically produce it myself accurately.
Exactly. Producing a sound involves complex motor skills, positioning your tongue just right, your lips, controlling airflow, using your vocal cords in a specific way. Recognizing a sound is primarily a perceptual auditory process. Therefore, actively improving your own pronunciation has a direct and powerful positive impact on your hearing ability. Your brain becomes much better at recognizing sound patterns it is familiar with producing itself.
That makes intuitive sense. If my mouth knows how a sound is supposed to feel and sound when I make it, I'll be much better at picking that same sound out of the noisy, fast stream of spoken English coming from someone else.
Precisely. Your production ability informs your perception. So the source then lays out 3 steps for improving these interconnected abilities: hearing and pronunciation. Step 1. Systematically acquire pronunciation knowledge and consciously apply it to your own speaking.
Okay, systematic knowledge. What kind of knowledge are we talking about here? Is it just learning the individual sounds, like the vowels and consonants?
That's part of it, but it goes way beyond that. The source stresses systematic knowledge. This includes individual pronunciation symbols, the phonemes, yes, but also crucial features like word stress, which syllable gets emphasized, sentence intonation, the melody of the sentence, and importantly, how sounds change in connected natural speech. Things like linking, when the end of one word flows into the start of the next. Reduction, where sounds get weaker or disappear, like unstressed vowels becoming a schwa sound. And assimilation, where sounds change slightly because of neighboring sounds.
Like the example they give, take it easy.
Exactly. In fast, natural speech, take it easy often sounds quite different from saying each word carefully and separately. It might sound more like chase de chaise or something similar because of the linking between take and it and easy, maybe with a slight change in the vowel sound too.
Yeah.
Understanding those rules of how sounds connect and change is absolutely key, not just knowing the dictionary pronunciation of each word in isolation.
Right, because nobody talks like a dictionary recording in real life.
Pretty much. And the source suggests acquiring the systematic knowledge relatively efficiently, maybe through a dedicated pronunciation course or a focused study period. Get the rules down. Then the crucial part is consciously applying this understanding to improve how you speak. This isn't just about aiming to sound more native. The source frames it as a primary method for training your ear. By practicing producing the sounds and the sound changes correctly yourself, your brain builds the necessary neural pathways to recognize those same sounds and patterns when you hear them spoken by others.
So, step 1. Learn the rules of how English sounds actually work in real speech and practice making those sounds and connections yourself. This improves your own speaking clarity and lays the groundwork for better hearing. Got it. What's step 2?
Step 2 involves using intensive listening, that process again, but this time focused specifically on hearing issues, not meaning issues. It's similar to the 4-step process for meaning comprehension, but the target of the analysis is different. Step 1. Identify parts of the audio where you simply cannot distinguish the words being spoken. You hear sound, maybe mumbled noise, but you can't parse it into actual words.
Step 1. Find the exact moments where the sound itself is unintelligible, where it just sounds like noise.
Exactly. Step 2. Analyze the cause of your inability to hear clearly. Was it an unknown word whose pronunciation you've simply never encountered before? That happens. But more often, especially as you get more advanced, is it a specific sound change phenomenon, linking, reduction, assimilation that you weren't aware of or maybe just couldn't process quickly enough? This is where that systematic pronunciation knowledge from step 1 becomes absolutely essential. You need it to logically analyze why the sounds are changing or merging in that specific instance.
Step 2. Diagnose the sound problem. Is it a totally new word sound, or is it one of those rules of sound connection, like linking or reduction, that I don't know or didn't catch?
Precisely. Step 3. Learn the missing knowledge. Look up the correct pronunciation of the specific word if that was the issue. Or, crucially, learn or review the specific sound change rule or pattern that caused the confusion in that context. Understand why did you sounds like dija, for example.
Step 3. Get the missing sound information or the specific rule that explains the change.
And step 4. Go back and re-listen to the original audio section, actively applying your new understanding of the sound or the rule. Confirm that you can now clearly distinguish the words and sounds that were previously just unintelligible noise. Verify that you can hear it now.
So this is intensive analytical practice, specifically targeting the auditory decoding layer of listening. It's training your ear to recognize the actual, sometimes messy sounds of real spoken English, not just guessing the meaning from context.
Exactly. And again, the source reminds the learner here to distinguish clearly. Was the problem hearing the sounds accurately? If so, train this hearing ability using this method. Or was the problem understanding the meaning of words or grammar that you did successfully hear? If so, you need to train your meaning comprehension ability using the other method we discussed earlier. This diagnostic step is vital for choosing the right training approach for the specific problem you faced.
Okay, so we learn the sound rules and practice producing them ourselves, step one. Then we use intensive listening to identify specific sound problems in native speech and learn their causes. Step two. What's the final step? Step three.
Step 3 is about closing the loop. You take the new knowledge gained from analyzing those previously unheard parts in step 2 and you actively apply it back to your own pronunciation practice. If you couldn't clearly hear a specific sound or a pattern of linked sounds or a reduction in native audio, it is highly probable, almost certain, that you are not producing that sound or pattern correctly yourself.
Ah, right. Because of that principle, what you can pronounce, you can hear. So if you can't hear it easily, you probably can't produce it accurately either. They really are two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. So correcting your own pronunciation based directly on what you learned by analyzing native audio reinforces that crucial connection between your production and your perception. You're closing the feedback loop. You use native input to pinpoint weaknesses and refine your hearing, and then you use those hearing insights to refine your own speaking, which in turn further improves your hearing for the next time. It creates this powerful, positive feedback cycle for both skills.
This whole detailed approach to hearing and pronunciation feels incredibly practical and, frankly, empowering. It moves beyond just vague advice like listen more or practice your pronunciation to giving a concrete analytical method for improvement. It turns that often frustrating experience of not understanding spoken English into a solvable problem with clear, actionable steps.
It really does. It provides both a diagnostic tool to figure out why you can't hear something and a targeted training regimen to fix it, much more effective than just guessing.
Okay, wow. So we've broken down the whole operation of English. We've identified the 4 key abilities needed, and we've gone into quite a bit of detail, especially on how to train each one, aligning with that focus on Chapter 3 and onwards. Now, the source synthesizes all of this analysis to propose what it considers the most effective overall strategy for English learning. This seems like a major conclusion derived from the entire framework presented.
Yes, this is really where all the previous steps converge into a grand strategy, if you will. Chapter 4 takes the analysis we did earlier looking at the 4 skills and examines them through different lenses. Which knowledge types are needed for each skill, the difference between input practice versus output practice, the requirement for instantaneousness, and the typical language level used in each skill.
Right, just as a quick recap, reading and writing primarily need vocabulary and grammar. Speaking and listening need all 3. Vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation.
Correct. And the source argues, pretty persuasively I think, that output practice, that's speaking and writing, is generally more effective for overall skill development than input practice, reading and listening. The reasoning is that the ability to produce English often implies you can also understand similar English, but the reverse isn't necessarily true. Just because you can read something complex doesn't automatically mean you can write it or say it fluently yourself. Output demands more active processing.
Right, and the instantaneousness factor. Speaking and listening happen in real-time conversations, demanding really rapid processing and production.
Yeah, high pressure.
While reading and writing usually allow more time for deliberate thought and construction.
Right. And while there are certainly exceptions, the source also notes that everyday speaking and listening often tend to involve simpler, more common vocabulary and grammatical structures compared to, say, academic writing, which can employ much more complex sentence patterns to convey nuanced information efficiently.
Okay, so putting all these points together, the knowledge types needed for each skill, the input versus output difference, the instantaneousness requirement, and the typical language level. This leads to a pretty powerful hypothesis about the most efficient way to actually train our English operation ability.
Yeah, the matrix analysis presented in the source really highlights that speaking requires the most diverse combination of factors simultaneously. It needs pronunciation knowledge, which, as we saw, links strongly to hearing. It's an output skill, which is argued to be generally more impactful for training overall ability, and it demands high instantaneousness, that real-time performance aspect.
So if speaking involves and requires so many different things at once, pronunciation, output, speed, maybe focusing our training efforts primarily on speaking could be a highly efficient way to simultaneously improve multiple core operational abilities, like a leveraged activity.
That's exactly the hypothesis the source proposes. It suggests that training the ability to speak effectively under the pressure of instantaneous communication While actively integrating pronunciation and utilizing your vocabulary and grammar for output could have a broad positive ripple effect across all your other abilities. Training the hardest, most integrated skill might pull everything else up.
And the source doesn't just leave it as a theory, right? It validates this hypothesis with the author's personal experience.
Yes, and this personal validation is quite compelling, I think. The author describes making a conscious shift in their own learning after building a solid foundation of knowledge to focus heavily on output and, specifically speaking, practice as the central pillar of their ongoing learning.
What did that look like? What kind of practice?
Well, it involved things like actively trying to use new vocabulary and grammar they learned immediately in sentences, engaging in daily online conversations with native speakers or other learners, and even practicing speaking to themselves, soliloquy or self-talk, just to increase the sheer volume and speed of their output.
Okay, really centering it on producing spoken English. And what were the results of this speaking-centered approach for the author?
The author found that this intense focus on speaking practice didn't just improve their ability to converse, as you'd expect. It led to significant, noticeable improvements across all their skills. Their listening ability dramatically increased, largely because of that strong link between pronunciation and hearing we discussed earlier. By practicing producing the sounds and natural speech phenomena themselves during speaking, they became much better at recognizing those same sounds when native speakers use them rapidly in conversation.
Wow, okay, so speaking helped listening. What about writing and reading? Did they benefit too?
Yes, they did. The constant demand for instantaneous sentence construction during speaking practice rapidly boosted their overall sentence construction ability. This increased speed and fluency in generating sentences translated directly into faster, more fluid writing as well. And their reading apparently improved because they started reading with a more active, sort of speaking sense, automatically processing how sentences are put together with an underlying awareness of how those sentences would actually be produced or used in speech. It made reading feel more connected to active language use.
That personal validation is really key, isn't it? It shows that this isn't just some abstract theory cooked up in an analysis. Focusing on the challenging integrated demands of speaking can indeed have a cascading positive effect on all aspects of English operation and practice.
It really demonstrates that training at the point requiring the highest integration of abilities, which seems to be speaking, can effectively pull the other related abilities along with it. It's efficient.
So bringing it all together then, the final optimal learning strategy derived from this entire analysis, the breakdown of operation, identifying the 4 abilities, the specific training methods, the matrix analysis comparing the skills, and the author's own experience, it seems pretty clear.
Based on both the theoretical framework and the validation through practice, the recommended strategy is this. 1. Build the necessary foundational knowledge in vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. Master grammar and systematic pronunciation knowledge relatively quickly in a focused period. Remember those estimates. Maybe 180, 300 hours for grammar, plus dedicated time for pronunciation rules and sounds. Keep building vocabulary ongoingly, as that never really stops.
Right. Get the foundation solid.
And 2, make speaking the central activity of your learning.
Center your learning around speaking. That's a really powerful directive. But you mentioned earlier, and the source clarifies, it doesn't mean only practicing speaking, does it? It's not like you abandon reading or listening.
Exactly. That's a crucial clarification. It doesn't mean you only speak. It means you consciously connect and direct all your other learning activities back to how you would ultimately utilize that knowledge in the act of speaking. Speaking becomes the hub.
Okay, can you give me some concrete examples of what that looks like in practice? How does centering around speaking change how you approach, say, learning vocabulary?
Sure. So when you learn new vocabulary, don't just write it down or put it on a flashcard and memorize the definition. Immediately think about how you would use that word or phrase in a real sentence you might actually say. Then practice saying that sentence out loud repeatedly, linking it to a feeling or situation, just like we discussed for the sentence construction training earlier. Make it active and production-oriented from the start.
Okay, so link vocab directly to potential spoken use. What about reading?
When you read an interesting article or book, don't just read for comprehension. Actively look for useful phrases, interesting sentence structures, or specific ideas that you think you might want to use yourself when speaking later. Note them down and then consciously try to incorporate them into your own speaking practice. You're harvesting input specifically for your output.
And listening, how does that connect back?
When you do listening practice, especially that intensive tool focused on hearing, and you identify sounds or patterns you previously couldn't hear, maybe a tricky linking sound or a common reduction, immediately take that insight and apply it to refine your own pronunciation practice. If you couldn't hear it, practice saying it correctly yourself based on what you just learned from the native audio. You're directly feeding listening insights into your speaking production.
So it sounds like every time you encounter new English, whether reading, listening, or studying vocab or grammar, your default thought process becomes, how would I say this? How can I use this when I speak?
Precisely. Speaking becomes the filter, the gravitational pull, the ultimate practical goal that shapes how you engage with all other forms of English exposure and study. It ensures that the knowledge you acquire isn't just stored as passive information, but is actively integrated into your operational abilities, ready to be deployed in real-time communication. It's about treating speaking not just as one skill among four, but as the primary engine for developing all your operational abilities effectively.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey, hasn't it? From recognizing that common frustration of knowledge without operation, through understanding the detailed mechanics of how English is used, isolating those four core abilities that really matter, learning specific analytical ways to train each one, and culminating in this clear, speaking-centered strategy that's apparently validated by real experience. It gives you a logical framework, a map to follow.
It really does. It empowers you with what the source calls English intelligence, the ability to analyze your own situation, logically identify the causes of your struggles, and apply the appropriate targeted solutions rather than just studying randomly.
Understanding the framework, the strategy, the specific training methods.
Mhm.
All of that is incredibly valuable knowledge. It gives you the what to do and the how to do it. But the source includes a final, really powerful thought right at the end, in the afterword, highlighting something absolutely essential that hasn't been the main focus of the operational analysis itself, but is maybe just as important for success.
Yes, and it's a crucial point. It's the concept of continuous execution.
Execution, as in actually doing the work.
Exactly. The author states quite clearly that understanding the best strategy possessing that English intelligence we just talked about is absolutely essential for efficient progress. You need the right map. But that map, that intelligence, is ultimately powerless. It remains mere potential without consistent, sustained practice, without continuous execution.
You can have the perfect map, the best hiking gear, know the whole route, but if you don't actually start walking day after day, you're not going to reach the mountain summit.
Precisely that. The source acknowledges that this is often the biggest challenge for learners, maybe even more than understanding the methods. Knowing what you should do, having the clear strategy laid out from this deep dive is one thing. Consistently doing it day after day, week after week, month after month, putting in the consistent effort, even when it's not easy or exciting, that's a whole different ballgame.
So the deep dive gives us the intelligence, the clear path. But the real transformation, the actual improvement in our ability to operate English, comes down to the daily grind, the consistent effort over time.
Fundamentally, yes. The intelligence ensures your effort is directed effectively, so you're not just spinning your wheels doing inefficient things, but it's the consistent application of that well-directed effort that leads to actual measurable growth. And the source suggests that even short, consistent bursts of focused practice are far more effective in the long run than sporadic, heroic, but infrequent long sessions. Consistent execution leads to small, noticeable improvements which build confidence, which in turn fuels motivation for further practice, creating that positive upward cycle of mastery.
That really puts the ball firmly back in the learner's court, doesn't it? You, the listener, now have a powerful framework for analyzing your English operation, identifying weaknesses in the four key abilities, and specific methods for training them, all pointing toward making speaking your central training activity. But the real challenge, the absolute key to unlocking the potential this knowledge offers, isn't just understanding the path, it's consistently walking it. So here's the thought to leave you with, based on this deep dive. How can you build that essential consistency, that continuous execution into your own English learning routine starting today to turn all this understanding into real, tangible progress?